I've read enough books about writing that I think I can drop them into one of two buckets for the most part. The first bucket are what I would call the mechanical advice books, which are things like Save the Cat, or on the other end of that particular spectrum is stuff like Professor McRory's Telling Writing, which is my favorite book of that kind. The worst of those kinds of books tell you what to do and how to do it, and that's pretty much it. And the problem is that while they can get you started, you really have to leave them behind at some point. The best of those kinds of books, they continue to reap endless dividends because they don't necessarily tell you what or how to do, but they show you possibilities and let you choose from those possibilities. And then there's another completely different class of writing book, which I would call the exhortative class of writing book, the kind that gives you spiritual or emotional creative advice. And one of the books I finally got around to reading after knowing about it for decades and never picking it up, that's in that vein, is Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones. And this is, as you can see, the 30th anniversary edition of this book. It's been around for quite some time. And it consists of a whole number of very short chapters, each of which is very aphoristic and very affirmative in its discussion of writing as an emotional and spiritual craft. And if that sounds a little bit too touchy-feely and loosey-goosey for you, I know exactly how you feel. Now, here's the thing. I actually have a soft spot for this kind of stuff, in big part because at one point in my life, I bumped into this kind of advice in a different form, not from this book, but from other places. And honestly, it was a big help for me at the time. It was a way for somebody to put their spiritual arm around my shoulder and tell me, you're not alone. Everybody has these struggles. The only cure for the struggle is just to keep struggling. After a while, it stops feeling like a struggle and starts to feel like something completely different, but it's up to you to do that. And that advice landed for me at a good time in my life. It came at exactly the time that I needed to hear it. The problem is, for some time after that, I took that kind of advice a little bit too seriously as the kind of advice that should be given to other people unconditionally, that other people were always going to benefit from that kind of advice. That was a mistake. I ended up giving that kind of advice to some people who really didn't need to hear it and who really needed to hear much more basic, direct, mechanical advice about how to do this stuff and how to plan and how to schedule things and how to create discipline for themselves. And I know people hate that word. Habit is maybe a better way to put it. If you're cringing from the word discipline, then just use habit instead. But that was what I did at the time, and I regret it. But again, I can't ignore the fact that there was something really useful there. And to the degree that I can still give that kind of spiritual, emotional, creative advice, I do try to do that. And reading this book reaffirmed for me that both of those things can be true. That yes, on the one hand, that stuff is sometimes not the right advice to give, but on the other hand, sometimes it enters your ear at exactly the right time and exactly the right place. Let me read a few passages to give you an idea of what kind of advice and exhortation and uplift the book tries to give you, because again, some of it is really very good. This is from a section called Writing is a Communal Act. Writing is not just writing. It is also having a relationship with other writers. And don't be jealous, especially secretly. That's the worst kind. If someone writes something great, it's just more clarity in the world for all of us. Don't make writers other or different from you. They're good and I'm bad. Don't create that dichotomy. It makes it hard to become good if you create that duality. The opposite, of course, is also true. If you say, I'm great and they aren't, then you become too proud, unable to grow as a writer or hear criticism of your work. Just, they are good and I am good. That statement gives a lot of space. They have been at it longer, and I can walk their path for a while and learn from them. Now, this is all really good advice if you think about it, but what she doesn't do is she doesn't really tell you in detail about how to enact that advice, what the step-by-step process would be for trying to figure out how not to be that way or how to be that way. That's all entirely up to you. And there are other books that I've read, again, like Peter Elbow's Writing Without Teachers, which I unreservedly recommend, that go into more detail about how these kinds of things can be done. But I have to imagine that for somebody who reads those words and is starving for good direction, good creative direction, they may nod and then suddenly realize, hey, wait a minute, you're leaving me at the moment when I most need to know what to specifically do next. Don't just leave me in the lurch like that. She then goes on to say, it's much better to be a tribal writer, writing for all people and reflecting many voices through us, than to be a cloistered being trying to find one peanut of truth in our own individual mind. Become big. Write with the whole world in your arms. Even if we go off alone to write in the wilderness, we have to commune with ourselves and everything around us. The desk, the trees, the birds, the water, the typewriter, or in our case, the word processor. We are not separate from everything else. It's only our egos that make us think we are. We build on what came before us, even if our writing is a reaction to it or we try to negate the past. We still write with the knowledge of what's at our backs. And again, I see the same dichotomy. On the one hand, we're being presented with some wonderful insight. On the other hand, we're not presented with any real way to act on that insight, to make it real. It's an exhortation. But if that exhortation connects with some earlier or existing sense of how those things could be put into action, then perhaps you'll be able to pick up on it and use it. And she concludes this section with this part, which I do like a lot. It's also good to know some local people who are writing and whom you can get together with for mutual support. It is very hard to continue just on your own. I tell my students in a group to get to know each other, to share their work with other people. Don't let it just pile up in notebooks. Let it out. Kill the idea of the lone suffering artist. We suffer anyway as human beings. Don't make it any harder on yourself. Now that's a great section because she's giving you something you can take home and work on your own, something specific. And I wish more of the book was like that. There's a lot of it that tends to be in the more exhortative vein than in this specific actionable vein. Now, I want to leave in all of this by saying that every now and then she does manage to fuse the highly spiritual concerns that are suffusing the book with a good specific piece of advice. Again, I wish there were more of them, but when they do come along, they're terrific. I want to read one of these particular pieces of advice in almost complete form. It's called Don't Marry the Fly. Watch when you listen to a piece of writing. There may be spaces when your mind wanders. We sometimes respond with comments like, I don't know, it got too deep for me. Often the problem is not the reader, but the writing. There are places where the writer went back on himself, became diverted in his own mind's enjoyment, forgetting where the story was originally heading. A writer might be writing about a restaurant scene, but become obsessed with the fly on the napkin, and begin to describe in minute detail the fly's back, the fly's dreams, its early childhood, its technique for flying through screen windows. The reader or listener becomes lost, because right before that, the waiter had come to the table in the writing, and the listener is waiting for him to serve the food. Also, the writer may not be clear on his true direction or not directly present with his material. This creates a blur in the writing. It is some area that is fuzzy, and so loses the reader's attention because it makes a little gap, letting the reader's mind wander away from the work. A responsibility of literature is to make people awake, present, alive. If the writer wanders, then the reader too will wander. The fly on the table might be part of the whole description of a restaurant. It might be appropriate to tell precisely the sandwich that it walked over, but there is a fine line between precision and self-indulgence. Stay on the side of precision, know your goal, and stay present with it. If your mind and writing wander from it, bring them gently back. When we write, many avenues open up inside us. Don't get too far afield. Stay with the details and with your direction. Don't be self-absorbed, which eventually creates vague, muddy writing. We might really get to know the fly, but forget where we are. The restaurant, the rain outside, the friend across the table. The fly is important, but it has its place. Don't ignore the fly. Don't become obsessed with it. Irving Howe wrote in his introduction to Jewish American stories that the best art almost becomes sentimental, but doesn't. Recognize the fly, even love it if you want, but don't marry it. Now, that's great advice. And there's more than a few books I can think of where the author has in fact married the fly and gone on and had children. Unfortunately, we all know what happened. We all saw that movie with Jeff Goldblum. So to the degree that a book like this can offer you specific and useful things, I think it's really helpful. And here's the other thing. I think everybody is going to have a very different idea of what constitutes a specific piece of advice. Sometimes people need to hear something general, a general exhortation expressed directly and clearly, because they may have had it quasi-verbalized in the back of their minds for a long time, and then it took somebody else coming out and just saying it nakedly in those words for them to believe in it and say, yeah, I've had this in the back of my head for so long, and I've just ignored it because I just thought I was being foolish, but somebody else with years of experience is coming out and telling me that it's true. So to the extent that this book can do that, I think it's going to be really useful. But I do think that it is something where the more concrete the advice you are hungering for, the more specific the lessons, the more you're probably going to feel frustrated instead of uplifted. That said, if any of the bits that I quoted from it have spurred you to take an interest in this book, by all means read it, and I would love to know what you think about it. Now, I want to relate all this back to the channel's main subject, the creation of science fiction and fantasy, because the people that I have talked to who create science fiction and fantasy, again, they tend to fall into one of two camps. There's one camp that's a little bit more on the mechanical side, in the sense that they crave specific details about how to put a story together, how to arrange things properly, and so on and so forth. And then there are other people who are just doing it by the seat of their pants, doing it completely by the feel of it. And I have the feeling that the first group may actually benefit slightly more from this book than the second group, even though the second group might find a lot that they recognize in it immediately. And I say this because I found that the people who are most caught up in things like making plans and being specific and exact, they tend to lose sight of themselves and their own needs and why they're doing this. Or they don't know how to look at those things in the right light. They may end up having existential crises of one kind or another when they're trying to make all this stuff work. I know at least one writer who is very much in that vein, a friend of a friend who I've gotten to know very well over the past 10 years. And I guess the main issue that he has is he's just not very confident in himself. And I don't know if reading something like this is going to give him confidence in himself, but I don't know. There's some passages in here that might hit home. Consider this, for instance. Writing has tremendous energy. If you find a reason for it, any reason, it seems that rather than negate the act of writing, it makes you burn deeper and glow clearer on the page. Ask yourself, why do I write, or why do I want to write? But don't think about it. Take pen and paper and answer it with clear, assertive statements. Every statement doesn't have to be 100% true, and each line can contradict the others. Even lie if you need to get going. If you don't know why you write, answer it as though you do know why. When the old nag in you comes around with, why are you wasting your time? Why do you write? Just dive onto the page, be full of answers, but don't try to justify yourself. You do it because you do it. You do it because you want to improve your handwriting, because you're an idiot, because you're mad for the smell of paper. And I always wonder about whether people who have been trained on the more mechanical side of writing advice will see this sort of thing as silly, or if it'll touch a spark within them. And I honestly hope it's the second of those two things. I honestly hope that when people get into contact with somebody who talks about these things from a spiritual perspective, that they will realize that there's a scent there that they haven't smelled yet in their lives. They want to take deep lungfuls of it. And then there's some people who are just going to take one sniff of it and walk away. You never know. But I do think it's worth the exposure just to see what happens. So once again, the book is Writing Down the Bones. 30th Anniversary Edition was the one I read by Natalie Goldberg, available in print and digital editions alike. I happen to like the print edition of this, by the way. I do keep it on the short shelf just above my desk where I keep all the stuff that I've been pulling out for inspiration. Because dang it all, when I get down to it, it is an inspiring book. It may not be inspiring in the exact way that I had hoped for when I first picked it up and found out about it, but it does have inspiration in it, even inspiration I didn't know that I was looking for. So I guess that's worth it. Anyway, until next time, stay curious.